Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another virtual shop talk at the Northwest Corner Woodworkers Association. I'm George Knutson, and I've been a member of NCWA for about 6 years now. But for the first 55 years of my life, I didn't know what a track saw was, much less what it could do for me. But I did know that I'd gotten along just fine without one up to that point. Then I had a chance to try one out, and the rest, as they say, is history. In this video, I'm going to share a few of the standard uses for a track saw, what they're really good at, and a few unique tricks I've picked up along the way. So welcome to my shop, and let's get started. All right, we're talking track saws today, and they come in a lot of different shapes and forms, sizes. Many of us, what is a track saw? I should probably start with. And a track saw is essentially a portable circular saw and a track of some sort to guide it. The idea being you want to make a cut that is as straight as possible. This is an example of a shop-made version. Two pieces of plywood ripped parallel, one attached to the other. Your circular saw runs against the fence. The first cut you make actually will make a saw curve cut right in line with your blade, so that gives you an exact alignment for where your cutting is going to happen. Some limitations with this are the fact that you have to hold the saw against the fence, and the downside there is sometimes you're good at it and you keep everything aligned right where it needs to be. Sometimes dust gets in the way and the saw can wander. That's a little drastic. It wouldn't be that much in reality, but that little bit of wandering gives you a very crooked cut. So it has a limitation in that respect. Since the time of shop-made tracks, a number of manufacturers have come out with a track something like this. And in this case, there is a recess in the saw plate and a ridge on the track which locks the saw in place. So now there is no shift there. So you don't have to do any work to hold the saw against your straight reference point. All you're doing is pushing the saw forward. This opens up a lot for using these guys and for the accuracy. There are right now out on the market, I think 9 or 10 at least, different manufacturers of track saws where they make both a saw specifically for this and a track that matches with it. There's this happens to be Festool. There's Bosch, there's Makita, there's Grizzly has a version, Craig, DeWalt, Shopfox, Wen, I think is another one. So there are a lot of them out there. A lot of variations on how powerful the motor is, how large the blade is, which also then determines how thick a material you can cut. How accurate is it? How adjustable is it? There are a lot of, just like with buying a car, you get a lot of different features to shop for, and some are better at one thing than the other. One thing I really like with this saw is the adjustability to get the fit on the actual fence itself. You might not be able to see that, but you can hear it, the slop that there is with the saw riding on this ridge. There's a little dial in both the front and in the back that you can adjust to essentially snug that plate up right up against the inside edge of that ridge. So now there's no play whatsoever. So it just stays dead on straight, and it takes very little effort to slide that saw along. I'll just point out one other thing that I really like about the Festool is that the material they use in these strips on the bottom is basically like wetsuit material. It just has a great grip. I'll throw this thing down on dusty plywood and without any clamps at all, and it just does not move. It stays right in place where you set it. Not all of the track saws out there have that feature on them. You can use a clamp with it as well, but you don't have to, is kind of the point I'm making there. Oh, also, one of the other things that you'll find in terms of variations, from one brand to another is what is the range of bevel that you can cut with the saw. Some have a lot wider range, so look at that as well. Again, this one I really like because it is zero clearance the way the saw is engineered. When I tilt the blade all the way to a 45 out here, the inside edge of the blade is still right on the edge of my track. So as long as I line up this edge of my track with my cut mark, regardless of what angle I tilt it to, the inside edge of the blade will always be right on that edge. So it's very, very accurate that way. Okay, so breaking down full-size sheets of plywood is one of the big pluses, one of the big primary applications for using a track saw. Wrestling with a 4x8 sheet of plywood or 3/4 inch melamine or MDF or something is a real chore. So this saw really shines for this sort of thing. The way I generally will do my breaking down of plywood is if I'm coming from the lumber yard with sheets of plywood in the back of my pickup, I'll actually do this out in the driveway, out in front of the shop. If it's raining out, I have to do it inside like I'm going to show you right here. But basically what I use for a platform underneath is a piece of, I think you can probably see this. This happens to be 2-inch thick styrofoam. You can use 1-inch thick, there's 1.5 inches, there's all different thicknesses. But the idea is this provides a surface that you can cut through your material and it'll cut into the styrofoam and not, as opposed to cutting into the concrete or cutting into your workbench. It saves your blades. So I'll lay this down on the concrete out in front of my shop when I pull a piece of plywood off of the back of the truck, or I'll lay it on the floor in my shop for a scenario like this. Then your sheet goods will drop down on top of it. And again, this I've just laid out, so hopefully the markings can show on the camera here, but oftentimes we have projects where we need various size pieces and various shaped pieces, some long and skinny, some square, some rectangular. Trying to make those cuts on a table saw is pretty tricky. With a track saw, you can just knock them out one at a time. So the way in reality you would be doing this is you would use a tape measure and mark, and then you're just lining up the track with your marks. Saw goes on the track, and then you go ahead and make your cut. Again, it sort of depends on the layout that you have to work with, but using different length tracks, you can make cross cuts very easily. Long cuts, again, you're measuring from a common edge to where you want to make your cut. Drop it on the track, and away you go. I actually had a guy approach me about a process problem he had. He was going to build a bunch of kiosks for candy machines at a mall, and actually 165 malls he was going to make these kiosks for. So we needed to make a whole bunch of parts, same size kind of thing, and he did not want to spend $50,000 on a big sliding table saw. So he thought this kind of arrangement with a track saw would work really well because he was just a two-man operation. So I came up with a way for him to do this kind of thing. So basically it amounted to making sets of stops that locks into that side. References that distance is the same. You make these so that when you align the track to those stops, you can repeat that same cut over and over and over again. So you line it like that, make a cut, then you move over to that cut edge and do the same thing. Reference off of there, reference off of there. You can make duplicate parts like crazy, and you're not having to wrestle with a big sheet of plywood. The only lifting you're doing is putting the saw on and off the track. Okay, so back at the bench. Another application for a track saw with sheet goods is when you need to cut a hole in the center of a sheet, or somewhere away from the edge. That's where the plunge capability of a track saw comes into play for you. So you can see that the blade will punch straight on down. You'll also hopefully see in there that one of the other pluses with the Festool saw is it has a riving knife in the back here. So just like for the safety factor of preventing pinching behind your blade on a table saw, this saw also provides you that same safety factor. This riving knife on this saw actually is spring loaded. So as you can see, it comes up out of the way. So that allows you to be able to plunge in the middle of a piece of plywood or sheet goods, and that riving knife will come up out of the way until the saw blade is fully engaged into the wood, and you move forward an inch or so, then that riving knife will slide right in behind and give you the protection from the material closing up on your blade that you need. So in order to cut a hole like this, you're basically going to mark out with a square, mark out your lines for all the way around, line up your track with the lines where you want to cut, set it onto the track, and on this saw there are markings at the front and at the back end here that tell you where the blade will be when it's in the fully down position. So I can line that mark up on the back with the edge of my perpendicular cut here. And know then when I plunge the saw down, when the blade gets all the way to the bound down position, it's cutting right back to this point. So then I move forward as I'm making my cut until the front line lines up with where I want to stop, and I've got a complete cut going all the way through. Now the fact that it's a circular blade means I do still need to cut with a handsaw a little bit at the bottom because the cut is coming up and out. But on the top, you can pretty well see there that I was able to stop without going past the mark. I've been able to stop the blade exactly where I want it to be on my lines. Sometimes that's critical, sometimes it gets covered up with trim work, but if you need it to be a good, clean, tight corner, you can get it. Okay, so moving on to solid woods. I don't know about you, but when I go to the lumber yard and I get real fussy about the boards I pick, and I try to pick as many straight boards and non-warped, twisted, curved, you know, best boards I can find, but sometimes you have to put up with a little bit of curve. So this is an example of a board that's got a pretty good crook in it. That even across just that 6-foot span, there's almost a ½ an inch gap in the middle. This thing has got that much bow in it. Obviously, you can deal with that situation on a jointer, standard operation. The downside in this scenario is the length of the piece. And if I needed shorter pieces, I would break them down into the shortest length I need first, and then I would be fine on the jointer. So it is awkward to balance a heavy, thick, long piece of wood on a jointer to try and cut that out of there. So this is one of those places where a track saw shines for you. So the way you can deal with this is laying your track out where you want to make your cut. And in this scenario, that would be about the way I would go. I want to leave a little bit of meat here to be taken at the narrowest point, and I want an equal amount out there. So lining that up and running the track saw across here will give me a jointed straight edge. At that point, then I can use this edge against the table saw rip fence, and I can rip the opposite edge to be parallel with it, moving on for the rest of the joinery. A lot of times I get a clean enough cut here, I can actually glue up from that. Sometimes I want to run it over the joiner. With it already at first being cut straight, it's going to be an easier thing on the joiner to clean that up, but you can still, a lot of times this is a heavier piece and it still won't work that well on a joiner. So let's show you another scenario where this is the actual joint that I want to put together. Okay, now you can obviously see from this camera angle that we got a large gap in there. The way you can deal with this situation, which is pretty unique considering other tools you might have in your shop, is the way I can deal with this is I can set this first board up just like I've shown you make that rip cut to give myself a straight edge on this board, then I would do the same thing on the other board. Position the track where it needs to be. And this one happens to have that bow in the opposite direction, so it's wider here in the middle and less on the ends. But I go ahead and use the track saw to make a cut on that edge as well, and then I have two straight edges that I can put together as a joint. First, I make one straight cut edge on each board. Then I will push the two boards together, and I'll clamp them down. Put the track back in place, right on top of that seam, so that I'm actually back just a little bit from the seam, so that the saw blade is actually taking just a whisker off of each side of each board. So I make one pass down the line, and I'll close them back up again and clamp them in place, and make a second pass. And I'll show you what kind of joints you can get from that. Okay, so these are two boards that I did exactly what I just told you about. I ripped this side of this board, I ripped this edge, pulled them together, clamped them down, set the track right down the middle, and ran it one time. Well, a lot of times that's enough. I just want to be a little more sure on it. I actually put them together again and ran it a second time. So if you have long boards, real heavy planks, something that's very awkward to try and run across a joiner. If your joiner has a relatively short bed, a lot of different circumstances where you can't really use another tool, this tool can joint long boards, heavy boards, wide boards, very cleanly, very nicely. Another scenario where I use a track saw quite a bit is trying to get grain direction on wood to work for me. Not every board that you pick out at the lumber yard has straight, clear grain. In fact, most of them don't. Most of them have some curve to them, some bending of the grain, of the wood grain, an angle to the grain. And if I need short pieces, let's say I'm building a sofa table where I have a long apron in the front and then I have short aprons on the ends. I like to have the grain be uniform. But if the boards I have that are all the same color and same texture I have a nice long one for my front and for my back, but I can't, but there's too much curve. If I make a cut parallel to an edge, the grain on this board is running at an angle up like this. That's exaggerated, but that's the way that grain is running. What I'll oftentimes do is make a cutout, a window, the size of the piece that I'm looking to machine. So I can lay this anywhere on the board and I can see exactly what I would, where the grain works the best for me. If I put this parallel to the edge, you can see the angle of the grain here is not highly desirable. It comes down lower here than it does over there, and it's even more exaggerated there. What I really want to do is, if I can get this grain running parallel to these long edges, that gives me the best look. But as you can see, I'm not parallel to either one of the edges. So with a track saw, I can lay out pieces like that on the board. I can come back in with a piece of chalk or whatever. Mark where that one is, and maybe the other end might be down in here. And then I just allow a little extra material for clearance and cleaning up. I can line up the track exactly where I need to be on that line, make that cut. I can make that cut. I can then line up that cut and that cut. And I have what looks to be a board that grew just perfectly straight, just like I needed it for the grain to be continuous and all parallel all the way around my workpiece. this actual piece I just grabbed isn't nearly as exaggerated as a lot of boards that you have. The grain runs a lot farther out of square. But that one comes in handy a lot for me. Okay, so kind of one final little project here. Kind of a fun thing you can do with this saw also is miter joints for like a waterfall edge. Get a nice tight 45-degree corner and have any irregular faces. It still accommodates it all just fine. So this one I've already done. So I'll walk through doing another one on here, and then we'll see how it gets put together. Again, the cut that the saw is going to make is going to be exactly on the edge of this track. So all I need to do is position the edge of the track right at the front corner here, and it will start my 45 there and run down. Okay. So first of all, I want to secure this workpiece because it's got obviously a non-flat side, not a big thing. This is one of those handy places for those of you who have torsion boxes in your shop. You know how handy this guy is. I use it a lot. Elevates a workpiece so I can get clamps anywhere I want to put them. Lightweight, easy to store. Okay, so we've secured the workpiece. Now I want to position the track right up at the edge. Make an even flush fit there. Now this is the case when I do use clamps with this track, even though it does have that sticky type bottom material. I do want to be real sure on this. So there's a dovetail slot in the bottom of the track and a dovetailed end on these clamps. So that slides in, goes all the way over. I'll get them both put in place and you'll see how those clamp together. So I'm right at the edge where I want to be here. Everything is secured. My 45 is going to be cut on the bottom edge here. So I need to set my saw. It's just loosening two knobs. Drop it off to the stop at 45 degrees. Okay, so the one thing you obviously have to pay attention to on this is the weight of the saw and where it is, because now all the weight is hanging out over that edge, so it can tip that way. So you do want to make sure you're holding down on the plate on the back side. And I just reminded myself of one other thing to do, and that is to clamp this torsion box to my bench, because I'll be pushing on the saw, and I don't want it to push the whole torsion box, so we'll throw a couple planks in there real quick. And two. Okay, so track is locked in place, in line, everything is good there. Now we're ready to fire up and make that cut. Okay, here we go. I want to hold on to this strap piece. Show you where that gets used next. We're going to go off camera now, and I'll cut the other side of this joint exactly the same way, and then we'll show you a way of joining these two pieces together. Now that we've got the 45s cut for our joint, there is the joint we're talking about. We need to hold that together some way, and one of the ways that I use is with dominoes. I find this to be a very effective way to do it, especially on a smaller scale kind of project like this. So I've marked the location for my domino, and I've already cut them on this end, which you can see over here. So I'm cutting the matching end of it, so you'll see that. First of all, though, remember I said hold on to the offcut piece, and there's a reason for that. I'm gonna take this piece and I put double stick tape on it. And I'm gonna line up that pencil edge, that knife edge I should say, at the very top. I wanna make that flush and stick that on there. What that does now is it gives me a 90-degree angle, a good square angle right there. What you'll find with a domino, the way this thing is built, there's a little notch right at the very corner where this plane meets this plane. There's a tiny little bit of a recess there. If you put the domino on that real sharp 45-degree point down there, the actual point goes up into that little notch. And that doesn't seem like much, but when you do that on this side, and then you do the same thing on the other piece that goes in there, the result is a gap of about 1/16 of an inch. And you can muscle through that with clamps, you can come up with some other creative ways to cover it, but what I have found is by saving that offcut, which I know is at 45, and reattaching it on the back side here, that locks in my 90 degrees, and now I'm actually referencing, when I put this domino on there, this face is registering on this, the front face is registering on this, and I know it's at a 90-degree angle, and my location will make a tight joint. So let's just run these real quick and put this little guy together. Off. I don't know, this is a little dangerous. Unrehearsed here. Not bad. So glue and the clamp the next time. What that does, that just kind of, in my mind, that just is a testament to the accuracy of that saw, the repeatability. As long as you have square reference surfaces, you're going to get joints in the right place. You're going to get a cut that's clean and smooth. Even in scenarios like this where you have curved surfaces as part of the thing. So with that, I think I would just say have fun, try a track saw. It's not necessarily a tool that every shop needs to have. There are other tools that can do pretty much all of those things. This one does it really well, really accurately. It's portable. It saves, for me, it's my back. It saved my back and my legs. And it's paid for itself many times over. So give it a try. You're welcome to borrow mine sometime. Stop by the shop and I can walk you through it and you can try this one out and take it for a test drive. That's it.